Hello, I'm Smoking Cheddar, but you probably already knew that. Welcome to another deep dive. This week, or this time round I should say, we'll be looking at fighters as an air asset, and as before we'll check out the tech trees. We will then check out the units themselves and the mechanics that they use. Then we'll move on to the officers, pairings, and potentially some scenarios. So I was going to do a video specifically on my fighter, and it led me into explaining multiple things about the other fighters. So I canned the video, and I decided, why not just do another deep dive? So make sure you got yourselves a drink, a cup of tea preferably. Also get yourselves a snack. This evening I have ramen. Yep. Okay, I got sweet and sour spicy for those of you who are interested. I bought them from my local Korean supermarket. Very tasty. I do recommend if you have one nearby. So, let's begin. So we're going to start off with the advanced tech tree. And you'll see that I've already got a little bit of invested. I've got a little bit of investment in this tree already. And as before, we're going to be looking at the pictured unlocks and how these are useful. The top one here is specifically for bombers, and as you can see, when your bombers leave your base, their speed is increased by 30% for 10 seconds. This isn't obviously applied to fighters, but if we do come back to this tree for a deep dive on bombers in the future, there's a thing. But this is what we're interested in. We're interested in this one. Cobra maneuvers. When your fighter planes are attacked, there is a 10% chance their maneuverability will increase by 30% for 2 seconds and can trigger every 10 seconds. So the longer they're in the fight, the higher their maneuverability stat is increased. Now, I hear that some of you might be scratching your head saying, hey, Cheddar, what's the maneuverability stat? We'll get to that. We're just going to cover the advances you get through this tree first. Here at the end of the tech tree, we have all-weathered combat. When your planes start a battle, their firepower increases by 5% every second for a maximum of 25% until they leave the battle. So much like the maneuverability, this is over a period of time going to increase the amount of rate of fire, your hit rate, and your damage output. And it's just going to keep stacking. So the longer you're in a dogfight for, the more they're going to be dealing damage. There are a few that are worthy of note. We have this one here, AA cluster rockets, which increases the fighter plane's intercept capabilities. We have multi-barreled aircraft MGs, which increases the fighter plane firepower. Obviously, we have an increase in fighter plane HP. Fighter plane maneuverability increase. Aircraft speed. This one's actually pretty handy for chasing down other enemy aircraft. Bomb maneuverability isn't applicable for this video. And aircraft training speed, which is handy if you are up against it. So that's just a brief overlook of what you get out of the advanced tech tree, which at the moment probably doesn't mean a lot to you unless you are already fairly deep in your air power. So I'll have a brief look at the modern tech tree. And the first pictured unlock we get is when a fighter plane troop is not moving, it gains 5% firepower bonus every 5 seconds, stacks up to 3 times, and lasts until the fighter plane troop starts moving again. So if you're in a holding pattern in a fight, you've just dumped your fighter plane in the middle of a massive cluster. The longer it's in fighting for, it's getting increased maneuverability, increased firepower for every second it's fighting, and if it's staying still, it's getting an additional stack of firepower. So that is very, very handy, very spicy indeed. BVR operations. Plane troops gain 5% bonus to damage and damage resist. If a plane troop has taken no damage for 10 seconds, it gains 10% damage bonus. Otherwise, it gains 10% damage resist bonus. I mean, if you're in a big air battle and your fighter planes aren't being targeted, this is ridiculously overpowered. And even if it is being targeted, you're getting a 10% damage resist bonus, making your planes just that much harder to kill. So let's keep all of these in mind going forwards. We've spoken about the tech, what sort of tech we're going to get. So let's have a look at the fighter planes. And for sake of argument with this, we'll be looking at 8.1 as I play silver. We'll be looking at 8.1 through the manual, so as it stands with my tech. Modern units, fighter planes. So the first one we're going to start off with is the MiG-17. Obviously I don't have this unlocked, I'm not using a MiG. And here we can see the firepower directly affects main weapon damage, main weapon fire rate, main weapon accuracy, secondary weapon damage, secondary weapon fire rate, and secondary weapon firing accuracy. This will be the same for all three aircraft. Here we have the intercept. Now, for those of you who are unaware, you're now about to find out what these different things mean and do. Intercept. Fighter planes with a higher intercept deal more damage with their first strike upon entering combat. With their first strike. Harass capability. When fighter planes with higher jamming capability hit a target, they hamper the bombing efficiency of that target. So they've recently changed this. It used to just say jamming capability, now it says harass capability. It's basically just a way to reduce damage being dealt by bombers. So if you have a high jamming capability on your fighter and it is attacking a bomber that is already engaging a ground target, whether that's a strategic bomber, i.e. the Lib bomber hitting a base, or a dive bomber, the Lib or Marty bombers hitting a artillery unit or something else that's weak on the ground, this is going to reduce the damage output of that vehicle while it's being shot at as well. Maneuverability. The higher the Air Force unit's maneuverability, the more likely it is to avoid enemy attacks. So maneuverability is basically a dodge stat, and intercept is basically a sucker punch, first punch in through the door stat. Like, we're going to be able to hit really hard, really fast. So what bonuses do you get with the MiG? Well, camp bonus. Enhanced maneuverability, superior maneuverability to other fighter planes from other camps. So the MiGs have a naturally higher maneuverability stat than the other fighter planes do, which means that if you're using a Martyr fighter or Martyr MiG and you're stacking the maneuverability bonuses either through the tech tree or through the officers, you're making it harder for other people to hit you, which is quite useful. Let's be fair. I mean, if you were going to stick certain officers on there with shields or increased maneuverability, you effectively make a tank in the sky. An aircraft that not can only soak up damage, but is going to be hard to hit, which makes it ideal for sucking up base AA or AGAA, or even just holding a enemy fighter in place while other teammates send their fighters to intercept and destroy the enemy fighters or bombers. So as a fighter plane goes, how I particularly use this fighter plane, I did have it at 7.1 at one point. How I would use this is I would leave it in a pattern out on the front line, get it engaged, and then other people would send in their fighters to basically back me up. It's effectively an SH of the sky. It doesn't have a lot of HP, but the enhanced maneuverability does mean that it is just going to dodge that much more. And with a shield officer such as the Witcher, for example, you're going to take naturally less damage. The Witcher also has maneuverability stats, which is extremely handy. Moves us on to the Lib Fighter. Obviously, if you're rolling the Lib, it's the F86 Sabre. Same as before. Here we can see we've got 920k in firepower, opposed to the 904 firepower from the Martyr. We do on the Martyr have 259 in HP. We have 294 in HP on the Lib Fighter. Now the Lib Fighter has increased firepower, I believe. Superior firepower to planes from other camps. Now, obviously it has higher HP as well. So things like shields are very good. Firepower boosters are very good. So again, this is much like the Martyr Fighter, where you're able to hold an engagement for a long period of time, and you're basically trying to grind down your opponent with superior health and superior firepower in this case. Doesn't have stellar stats for maneuverability. If we just compare the maneuverability stats of the two aircraft, we're on 229 versus 255, which is a significant difference, and by the time you start stacking that stat even higher with its percentage bonuses from the tech tree, that's just going to exponentially increase. That gap will widen slightly. It makes the Lib Fighter a contender for the 1 slot over, if I had to say generically, if you needed a fighter up in the sky, you either probably want the Martyr Fighter or you want the Lib Fighter as a generic assumption, because they both use similar tactics. They're using standoff capability, whether it's through maneuverability in a shield or through firepower in a shield. You're basically trying to engage an enemy player for as long as possible to win that fight. Which brings us to what I'm using, which is nothing like the other aircraft at all. I'm using the Vanguard Fighter, or the Mirage. It has a high intercept ability of 150. It's got a very low maneuverability, very hard to dodge. HP for mine is a little bit higher, and we've got 900,000 in firepower. What does this extra intercept give us though at 150 if we compare it to, say, the Martyr intercept? That's a significant portion higher, and again, it's quite a bit higher than the Lib Fighter. So if you're running a Vanguard Fighter, there's only really one thing you can do. That is wait for the engagement to start, dive in, and damage as much as you can with a stacked intercept capability. Once your intercept capability is high enough, through means of boosting it with your officers, that initial strike is going to knock out between 1 to 2 million power, depending on the level you're playing at. The level I'm playing at, which is Silver 1, I often see my fighters knock out between 1 and 2 million in an engagement, which means I'm able to take on people who are a lot higher than me. And then because I have scored kills in that engagement, you get other stats and other bonuses. They obviously receive penalties. And then as the fight continues, because of my tech tree with increased maneuverability that slowly stacks over time, I then start to pull away in power. Now, if you've watched fighter engagements in the sky, you'll know that once one fighter gets a lead in gapping the other fighter for power, then that generally means that fighter has won the engagement. If it just stays there and does nothing, it is going to... one of them will win and lose, and the one that wins is the one that's gapped on power. So those are the differences between the fighters. You've got two standoff fighters, one moving towards taking less damage and one moving towards doing more damage, and then you have an interceptor. So let's talk about the officers and how they could be best serving individual aircraft. So for myself, I'm currently using Bladewing and Brisk Eagle. For clarification, Brisk Eagle was going to be replaced by Darkwing. I've already made a start on him. Brisk Eagle is now going to be replaced by Sky Jockey. So what I'm doing with my intercept fighter is I am increasing the critical strike damage and I'm increasing the critical strike chance, as well as increasing the intercept, because I want that initial intercept to be a high probability of a critical strike, or the following shots to be a critical strike. This means that I'm going to be able to gap my opponent and win the fight a lot easier. So when I'm using an interceptor, I want officers that deal in these two stats. So obviously I'm going to want Bladewing. Bladewing does have an intercept buff of 25%. He has a damage buff as well. He does come with a healing coefficient, which is pretty mad. But more importantly, once he's awakened, he also comes with a 1100 damage coefficient, which means if you're engaged for a long period of time, you're going to shoot down more enemy aircraft. You just are. The longer they fight you as an interceptor, at this point, it's pretty obvious where it's going to lead. We're currently keeping Brisk Eagle in rotation because after landing a critical strike, this officer's troop takes no damage for 1 second, which can make the difference between you gapping an opponent and them gapping you. We also have increased critical strike damage of up to 50%. We have an increased critical strike rate of 30%. And we do have a patrol speed buff of 10%, which does mean chasing down opponents is a tiny bit easier, because when someone pulls away from you from a fight, you kind of want to ensure that fighter isn't going to be back in the fight anytime soon. You want to maintain air dominance over the battlefield. It's a good skill to have.
I'll fix it for you, no problem.
At some point in the near future, probably by the end of summer, maybe, we'll see how things go, I will be replacing Brisk Eagle with Sky Jockey. Now, I won't go over Sky Jockey in any great detail because I've actually just completed a video on Sky Jockey. It needs editing and uploading. It's probably going to be done before this one, which means you'll probably see Sky Jockey from the point of view of this video last week. But as you can see, again, we've got a critical strike rate and a damage buff. We have an intercept and a damage buff. We have an HP boost and a firepower boost. And we do have a maneuverability buff and a damage resist buff. So this is a good train-in skill for Martyr fighters because of the damage resist and the maneuverability. So I don't know if I would recommend her as an officer to a Martyr fighter. There are other officers, all of which are just as good. But I do recommend you getting this skill at the very least to level 5 if you're using a Martyr fighter, and then training this in on the captain immediately. And of course we do gain damage coefficiency with critical strikes. So as you can see, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to up my critical strike enough that I don't need to rely on Brisk Eagle's damage mitigation of 1 second. I want to be able to increase my damage output. As an interceptor, it's basically my job in the sky to ensure that I come in hard, I come in fast, I blow as many aircraft out of the sky in the initial wave as possible, and either force the other player to retreat and then gun them down in a chase, or alternatively just tip the balance of the air battle in our favor. And you just need one interceptor, guys. You don't need to have an entire air fleet of them. One interceptor is enough to change the tide of the battle. Nagarani, she's really good for damage mitigation. We've got shield coefficiency that can be popped. We have a damage resist buff that stacks and gets progressively higher. It can go up to 10 times the unlocked stat, so that effectively goes up to 50%, which is significant. If you're looking to have a standoff fighter, which is a fighter that's going to engage other fighters in the deliberate attempt to pull in more fighters into one giant cluster, for everyone to have a massive dogfight, or even to simply hold off over the top of an AG for as long as possible while that AG moves or whatever, you're going to want to be looking towards to Nagarani here. She's a fantastic officer. If you're using her on either the Lib or the Marty, I would not recommend her for the Interceptor. The damage resist bonus is nice, the shield is nice, but what you're gaining there is you're gaining survivability on an aircraft that simply is not designed for that. If I had to choose between the two, I'd say because of the shield, probably ear more towards the side of the Lib, but you could totally pair her on the Martyr fighter, but I wouldn't recommend it because there doesn't really seem to be any buffs to maneuverability. This is mainly damage resist, and you do get damage bonuses. You get a damage buff, so it's a good idea to maybe stick her on a Lib fighter and then use her to target people who are using Witcher on their MiGs, because you're going to deal a little bit more damage in the output. You're going to have a shield, and it'll be a fair fight. Okay, so Heaven's Savior, he's one of the earlier fighter pilots. He's a bit of a mess. And with the earlier fighter pilots, there's a lot of them, I just, they're not really sure what they are. So we start off, we've got jamming capabilities, which I said earlier in the video. You're looking at being able to mitigate the damage dealt by a bomber. Now, that sounds great and everything, and it is to a degree, but here's the clinch. If you've got a really high damaging fighter, then the jamming debuff is a complete waste of time. The reason for that is fairly simple, to be brutally honest, and that is because you can just dump more firepower and damage onto a fighter. What ain't there can't bomb. I'm sorry, it's... Whenever I see this guy in the sky, I generally feel that it's going to be an easy picking for me. There's maybe a couple of instances where it hasn't been this L4. There's one player who has this guy completely tricked out on a fighter that is just levels above mine. And even though he has what I would deem to be, personally, what I would deem to be an inefficient officer, because he has that much better tech, he has that much better equipment on his fighter, I just can't keep pace in a straight up fight. Unless someone has a standoff and has engaged him already, and I come in out the side with my interceptor and I can start taking him out from behind, basically. But no. It's mostly just mitigating damage over an area. I don't really recommend this officer on any fighter, personally. He's more of what I would call a trained officer. We've got an intercept bonus here of up to 35%. We have an HP bonus if you're using a shield. That's fantastic. We have damage resist buff if you're using no shield and you're on Lib fighter. That is absolutely brilliant. So he has his merits, but I would not be using him as a captain or an aide unless I was pretty much forced to, which luckily they've added enough air officers now that I'm not. Wings of Glory, he kind of follows in the same path as Heaven's Savior here. We're looking at AA firepower increase that can be stacked up to 5 times. That's pretty handy for a fighter. It's really good. Damage buff increase, that's brilliant. Firepower buff increase, absolutely fantastic. And then they throw in the jamming out of nowhere. Now, when he is awakened, he is going to deal quite a lot of damage. In fact, the fighter in question that I was up against during this L4 had Heaven Savior and Wings of Glory both awakened. I mean, This skill is kind of deadly, increases firepower by 20% for 20 seconds each time their troop shoots down an enemy aircraft, and can be stacked up to 5 times. You combine that with an intercept, it is very, very dangerous. But the problem is you have to wait until this guy's unlocked, like fully awakened, before you can get access to that. So it's kind of a bit of a commitment ahead of time. You have to be like, hey, I really want an interceptor that has like bonuses per kill. This is a fantastic little booster. To be honest, if you're going to stick him on anything off the bat, I'd say probably a lib fighter. You know, that's going to benefit the most from the firepower and damage output. You can stack him alongside Nagarani, sorry, and you're going to absolutely shovel damage and be able to take a little bit as well. We won't cover Darkwing because he's a lounge officer. And we don't cover lounge officers. Polar Phantom. He's a pretty good officer. Increased patrol speed, handy for running people down, HP. The stack of grit effect can be boosted, which is his tactical skill. Increased damage by 10% for 4 seconds, stacks up to 5 times after reaching 5 attacks. Triggering the skill will deal damage to up to 3 enemy Air Force units within range, damage coefficient of 600. If this guy is awakened, he will go on any aircraft without a problem. He will go on any aircraft without an issue, because his whole spiel is the longer I'm in combat, the more damage I deal once I'm awakened. He's an exceptionally good fighter pilot. I was using him on my interceptor for quite some time. I elected to remove him because of the length of time I've spent on my fighter now. I have to kind of look at like where I want to go with it. Do I want to have something that can stay in the air a bit longer, or do I want to have something that's going to really hurt with a hit and run? And that's where I've gone with mine. I've gone for critical strike. I've gone for intercept bonuses. Don't get me wrong. I've seen people put standoff officers on their interceptors, and they are dangerous. But they would be more dangerous if they were on a lib or they were on a Martyr fighter, respectively. This guy, you stick him on a Martyr fighter, the longer he's in combat for, he's just going to start unloading. You want this guy in combat for a long period of time, so you want high maneuverability, you want a shield, you want damage resist, you want that fighter to be in the sky for as long as possible, so his awakened ability can trigger. I'd recommend this guy on a Martyr fighter. He'd also work on a lib fighter, but the difference is with a lib fighter, you don't have that maneuverability bonus to get you out of a jam. So you are relying solely on the capabilities of the shields.
Still waiting.
Silver Comet, he's pretty good. I believe he's intercept off the top of my head. Maneuverability, intercept, firepower, critical strike rating, and he does damage coefficiency. So he's good either on the Martyr or on the Vanguard fighters, respectively, because of the 2 bonuses he gets. Now, his tactical bonus is a damage and maneuverability buff, which is very, very handy. It does go up to 30% maneuverability, and like I said, if you're playing a Martyr fighter, you want to stack that maneuverability really high. You want to make sure that when you get into a fight, you're hard to hit. The harder you are to hit, the longer you're going to stay up there. The longer you stay up there, the more chance you have of winning the battle. And it's pretty much the same for a lib fighter as well, but the difference is this guy is giving you bonuses to intercept. So you can either train this skill into the interceptor, but he does also have critical strike rating, so you do have to choose between the two, and you have to choose carefully. Would you rather have higher crit or higher intercept? Personally, if I was doing my interceptor a different way, I would have this guy and I would have him alongside Brisk Eagle. If I was going to do it as a sole crit interceptor, I would have him and I'd have Brisk Eagle, because you're just able to continuously deal critical strike damage, deal critical strike coefficiency through that. or maybe even have him
I'll fix it
paired
for
with
ya,
Sky
no
Jockey on a Vanguard. If I was going to put him on a Martyr, definitely definitely got to go with the Witcher. I know I skipped over her. That's because I wanted to do her last because she is broken, so broken. He's really, really, really good if you have his brother, Tip of the Spear, active on the ground, who I don't recommend. I mean, for sake of argument, we ran the maths for the average fight during this L4 for a base defense. If you were using him potentially as a ground officer, Tip of the Spear that is, you'd have to survive over 45 seconds with the amount of damage that was being dealt to our bases in order for his cooldown capability to actually allow you to deal one additional attack with all of the other officers, which would mean anything under that 45-second mark, it's a waste of time. You're better off just having another damaging officer in there. So if your base is really hard to kill and it takes 2 to 3 minutes for it to die every single time, sure, these two officers are a must. I mean, you want to have Tip of the Spear on the ground, then you stick him in the sky. You know, you're going to have a pretty good combination there, especially if you put if you put Tip of the Spear on something like a light tank, which is going to automatically target air units. Just food for thought. But I do like this guy. Yeah, I'd definitely stick him either on a Marty fighter or I'd stick him on an interceptor. If you've got points already invested in him and you've got either of those fighters, you're spoilt for choice there.
Just one look at
Sky Jockey.
That's all I'm asking.
She's just damage, crit, intercept. That's all she is. She does have a maneuverability buff, which you can train in. Again, you could put her on a Marty fighter as a result of this buff alone. But it would make her very dangerous. You do get an HP buff, which would aid in the shield. Which is, I know I keep saying it and I haven't covered it. We'll get to that in a second, why that's so overpowered. But personally, for me, I think that this is definitely a interceptor officer over the Marty officer, almost an inverse of Silver Comet here, who I would say, while he does the same as Sky Jockey, like you could pair these two on either of the aircrafts, but he's more geared towards the maneuverability, and she's more geared towards the intercept by virtue of having crit as well. Which does stack with the tactical skill. That being said, you know, he's got the same. You can see how these two officers would work well together on either aircraft, is what I'm saying. So, the Witcher, versatile dodge. Now, I've left her till last because, as far as things go, when it comes to standoff, the Martyr fighters are king. Right, they have a high maneuverability stat. You can stack them with HP, and you can start throwing in extra shields. So we all know she has a shield coefficient of 1000, and it goes up to 40 for the maneuverability, which is just insane. That is, I mean, increased maneuverability by up to 40%, and when this officer's troop is attacked, has a 20% chance to gain a shield for up to 1000. Shield coefficient can be triggered once every 4 seconds. Once every 4 seconds. A shield is normally an 8-second charge time for any ground unit. Once every 4 seconds. Damage resist buff, 15%. It's going to mitigate. She's going to mitigate up to 15% of incoming damage. She's got an additional 20% HP. We've got a maneuverability buff of up to 20%. When this officer's troop dodges an attack, its damage resistance is increased by 2%, stacks for 4 seconds and stacks up to 10 times. The higher you buff the maneuverability stat on your fighter, if you're using a Martyr fighter, you need her awakened, right? And then you need the highest maneuverability natural officer you can find. So you've got this skill here on her. You could train this up immediately and then stack it onto the Witcher, and then you could take him as the aid, and then just start stacking maneuverability and damage resist or HP, preferably HP because you want that shield. Now you do that on a Martyr fighter with those two officers and that specific skill being trained in, you're going to have a natural bonus of 40% with a triggered additional 30 on tactical, which is just bonkers. It's crazy. And as we already established, the longer Silver Comet's in Firefight 4, the more damage he's going to do. So the higher your maneuverability, the less damage you take, and if you do take damage, it increases your damage resist and maneuverability and then pumps out a shield. You see why I don't like this officer. I do like this officer, it's very powerful. I don't have a Marty fighter yet. I think this is good if you're using a Marty. Plain and simple, the Witcher needs to be considered. You can also use her on a lib fighter, although I do recommend it. It's not something like, there are other officers you can use. If you're going to double stack shield on a lib fighter, she's great, and then you can take Nagarani as well. That's a great combo for a lib fighter, but it's not the most efficient way around it. It's basically turning it into a sky tank. This officer is unfair if you stack the skills correctly, if you stack the stats correctly. So if you take anything away from this video, don't take away I should do XYZ with XYZ fighter. What you should take away from this video is I have access to XYZ fighter. What sort of stats can I boost, and how do those stats work? So that's why I make these deep dive videos, is I want to look at the stats of those units. I want to see how we can utilize the tech. And you've got to remember from the start of this video how many additional maneuverability bonuses we saw in the tech tree. Just as a quick reminder, if you are using a Martyr fighter, you are getting additional maneuverability bonuses through the tech tree. So think about the tech, think about the unit you have, and then appropriately assign the officers. Don't worry if your officers aren't awakened. Unless you specifically are utilizing that awakened skill, like I am with Brisk Eagle at the moment. I'm using it as damage mitigation for my interceptor, because the first strike of an intercept is a two-way situation. It's their intercept versus your intercept. So think about these sorts of things. This is what will make the difference between an AG on the ground surviving and an AG on the ground getting bombed. So you want if you're playing fighters, you want your fighter players to have the best capable unit that they have in the sky. That means having access to the best officers. You have access to those officers already. The Air Force officers operate very differently to the ground force officers. You know, fights can be over just as quickly as they can on the ground if the people in the air are doing what they should be doing properly. So that's your deep dive, gentlemen. I hope you've learned something today in my sad little corner of the internet. As always, I will try to leave a link in the description box for my Discord. If you have any questions, just feed the rules some pizza, and you'll have access to the rest of my Discord is just basically me shit posting. And other people do the same, so you're welcome to come and join the degeneracy, as always, gents. I'm going to do a reworked video on how my army works at 2.0. That's coming later on in the year. I am currently working on changing my setup. The eagle-eyed among you will have noticed that actually has already changed slightly. But it's going to change again, so don't worry about it. It's an ongoing process. We all know this is the case with this game. You go through phases of I want to use this, I want to use that, and you adapt to what your alliance needs. I'm doing the same, no difference to anyone else. That's why I got this far into the fighter tree. That's why I have a fighter that does what it does. And just to show you guys, my fighter right now, unbuffed, is sitting at 15.6 million. I can take out people of comparable level in no time. I just want to say and extend a personal thanks to ING's Conquer Fury from server 15, because he's the whole reason why I have this fighter. 6 months ago, his fighter was absolutely wiping out our air power in Cairo, and as a result, their bombers were just picking off our units before we even got to their base. And I said to my alliance, I said to Salt, I was like, hey guys, we're going to need to start working on fighters. And I just started pumping into fighters, learning about the stats, learning about everything over 6 months. And I said to him, hey, it's nice to see you in the L4 again. At the end of the L4, I'll send you a location. I'll leave my fighter there unbuffed. Could you engage my fighter unbuffed and see which fighter wins? And that's exactly what he done. True to his word, he sent his fighter there. He lost the fight. He didn't withdraw, as you can see, 102 to 36. And you can see that my fighter dealt 15.7 million and 4.71 in skill. And that took 60 seconds in a head-to-head. So you can learn from people in-game. Just be nice to them. They're happy to teach you. Conquer Fury taught me a lot about fighters 6 months ago. I've turned around and I've gone, hey, I've taken what you've done and made it a little bit better. So I just wanted to extend a personal thanks to him for letting me do this. But anyway, guys, that's the end of the video. I'm not going to keep you anymore. My ramen's gone cold, so I'm now going to eat that cold while probably getting yelled at over Discord. There's going to be a couple of PvP videos coming. I'm going to do one that is a long battle, and I'm going to do a collection of clips. So drink that tea, by the way, in case it's gone cold.